true or not. Judge Bruguiere is operating in this case because the two pilots of the Falcon 50 that was shot down were French, so he has jurisdiction.
Okay. Payam, I'd like to ask you a question. You said...
If I may...
Okay, go ahead. Your thoughts quickly, and then I have a question for you. Go ahead.
I think this question of who shot down the airplane, while it is important, is very much a distraction, because the image that is created is that were it not for the shooting down of the airplane, the genocide would not have occurred. And of course, the standard revisionist Hutu extremist perspective is that this is a spontaneous outburst of hatred. And if there's one thing that is very significant about the Bagosora judgment, it is in relation to the fact that the mass killings were carefully planned and organized prior to the events in April of 1994. And people forget that in 3 months, in a poor, underdeveloped country, 1 million, almost 1 million people were killed, which is, as Gérard Prunier, the French historian, points out, 5 times the killing rate of the concentration camps of Nazi Germany. This was a highly deliberated, organized plan.
It's interesting
the fact that the airplane was shot down is really, I think, a footnote to a genocide that was many months in the making.
But I was just going to say quickly,
I could not agree more. I would say many years in the making.
But Bagosora was cleared of having committed conspiracy to commit this genocide before April '94. I thought that's an interesting point. You know, when you detail how the genocide was planned well in advance. This was something building up that could have been prevented a long time ahead of time. But go ahead, Philip.
When you have these court cases, it's like any court case. You have 1 million, in this case, close to 1 million deaths, and you have many, many, many facets which you can take and build a case around. In the end, what they were able to convict him on does not mean that he is innocent of all the other things. It means that he is not proven guilty of all the other things in that particular set of processes. But the historical record clearly documents the process by which the build-up to genocide preceded April 6, 1994. And frankly, anybody who thinks that the downing of the plane triggered the genocide should only look at the fact that Bagosora moved that night to essentially stage a coup. So if he was not responsible for downing the plane, if in fact it were one day to be proven that somehow Kagame and the RPF had shot down the plane, it would be very hard to argue that they had triggered the genocide, that within half an hour Bagosora started rolling into action, staging what was effectively a coup d'etat, putting up death squads and roadblocks, sending out killers to take out the political leadership of the moderate Hutu remainder within the government there, installing Interahamwe mobilization plans that were clearly underway, and setting in motion what became this extraordinary campaign of government-sponsored massacres. So I think that it's absolutely right that the downing of the plane is a great and puzzling mystery. It's one of the defining events of the late 20th century that hasn't been legally decided yet. And at the same time, it's a false debate as far as the question of whether the genocide was planned and where responsibility for it lies.
Okay. I'd like to go back to a point that Payam was making, because part of the reason certain people are celebrating this verdict is because they believe it sends a message to others around the world that you will be punished if you commit war crimes. I mean, Payam, do you genuinely believe that this sends a message to other potential war criminals, those in vulnerable countries or countries vulnerable to conflict, or those already experiencing conflict, like Sudan, for example? Do you really think that they're paying attention to the actions of these courts?
Well, my first point, Andrea, would be that punishment after the fact is no substitute for prevention. And if there's any lesson to be learned for the international community with respect to Rwanda, is that this was quintessentially a preventable genocide. There were signs many months before from UN human rights experts, from General Romeo Dallaire, that a genocide was in the making. There was systematic incitement to hatred through the Radio-Télévision Libre de Mille Collines. There was distribution of weapons, training of Interahamwe militias, lists of Tutsis to be exterminated. So the reducing the colossal moral failure of the international community to a conviction against Bagosora, I think, misses the point. The point is that in Darfur, in the Congo, in all these other situations, the international community has to see the early warning signs and has to act before violence escalates to genocide. And getting back to the case of Rwanda, imagine simply if RTLM radio had been jammed and the génocidaires did not, in a country in which 70% of people are illiterate, living in remote areas in which their only source of information is radio, had that radio been disabled, that in itself could have significantly impaired their capacity to commit the genocide. On to the question of how these prosecutions can actually deter others.
Right.
This is a very difficult thing to gauge. Anyone who's a student of criminal law, criminology will know that even in a domestic context in which people are habitually lawful, do you deter others from committing murder if you prosecute someone? It's very difficult to answer with mathematical exactitude, but I will give you maybe just one instance of how international criminal justice can deter atrocities. In the Ivory Coast in 2004, where there was an escalating civil war between the government and rebel factions, there was a government-sponsored radio station that was inciting people to hatred against the northern population of Ivory Coast. And the special advisor of the United Nations on Prevention of Genocide, Juan Mendes, warned the president of the Ivory Coast that he could face prosecution before the International Criminal Court. And those radio broadcasts were brought to an end. Okay. So the point is not that there's a single factor that is going to stop these atrocities, but among if you like, a cluster of different initiatives that the international community can take, impunity should be eradicated.
Okay, we're just down to our last few minutes, George. I'll have you and Phil.
Let me try.
Okay, now Philip, very.
It's just that I don't quite agree with the this idea that the international community is motivated by wanting to help people. Take a look at Congo. They took the worst killers and made a government out of them, and then organized elections in a country you couldn't possibly hold elections in. It's just whatever's in their interest. Now, Congo's a rich country that has a lot of raw materials that the West needs. Couldn't fight a war in Iraq without the coltan from the Eastern Congo. You couldn't call on your cell phone without the coltan from Eastern Congo. I mean, this is ridiculous. You know, you take a look. The victors dictate the justice. I mean, international forces finally get into Sierra Leone. It reverses things for Charles Taylor. So now when Charles Taylor is in a weak position and in Nigeria, you get the Nigerians to arrest him and you try him. Well, I mean, what prevented you from doing that sooner? Everywhere you look, this is just ridiculous. What are the motive? You have to look at what the motivations are.
I would disagree with that.
Philip, I'll tell you what. I'll let you pick up on that point as soon as we come back from break. Unfortunately, we need to take that 12-minute break now for news and weather, but we will continue this discussion after that time. All of our panelists and another guest return when we come back, so do stay with us.
With Observers, France 24 offers you a new insight into the news. Discover the news via photos, videos and live accounts from people who directly experience events across the globe.